Picture this: Warsaw, January 1st, 1990. The buildings are gray concrete tombstones left behind by the Soviets. The air is cold. The shelves are empty. You have cash in your pocket, millions of zlotys, but it's worthless. You can't buy bread because there is no bread. The inflation rate is 640%. Your paycheck loses half its value before lunch. This is an economy in cardiac arrest. Now let me tell you what everyone thinks happened next. They think Poland joined the European Union. They think the West rescued them with charity and good intentions. They think democracy saved the day. That's the fairy tale. Here's the truth. Poland didn't wait to be saved. They performed surgery on themselves with a chainsaw. They chose economic violence over slow decay. And 30 years later, they're richer than Portugal. They're about to pass the United Kingdom. They survived the 2008 crash without a scratch while the rest of Europe bled out. This isn't a story about politics or culture. This is a story about the ledger. This is how Poland went from bankruptcy to becoming the creditor. Let's follow the money. Rewind to 1989. The Soviet Empire is collapsing like a house built on sand. Poland stands at the edge of freedom. But freedom doesn't pay the bills. The communists left behind an economy that was essentially a Ponzi scheme held together with propaganda and price controls. State factories produced junk nobody wanted. Farmers grew food the government confiscated and sold at fake prices. The black market was the only real market. The official exchange rate said $1 equaled 500 zlotys. On the street, $1 bought 6,000 zlotys. Think about that gap. The entire national currency was a lie. Hyperinflation was eating the country alive. Workers were paid in cash that expired like milk. You got your wages on Friday. By Monday, they were worth 30% less. This wasn't an economy. It was a hostage situation. And the hostage taker was a 50-year addiction to central planning and fake money. Enter Leszek Balcerowicz. He's a 30-year-old economist who looks like an accountant and thinks like a surgeon. In September 1989, he's appointed Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister. He walks into an office where the previous occupant kept the books in a drawer, and the drawer was empty. Balcerowicz looks at the numbers and realizes Poland is clinically dead, so he decides to shock it back to life. This is the birth of shock therapy, the Balcerowicz plan, and it's the most brutal economic experiment in modern history. Here's what he did. On January 1st, 1990, he flipped the switch. He removed price controls on 90% of goods overnight. Bread that cost 1 zloty yesterday cost 10 zlotys today. He slashed government subsidies to state-owned enterprises. Factories that employed thousands were told to become profitable or die. Most died. He made the zloty convertible. Suddenly, the currency had to compete with real money. He opened the borders to foreign trade. Western goods flooded in. Polish junk couldn't compete. The immediate result was chaos. Unemployment exploded from 0 to 16% within a year. In some regions, it hit 20%. Entire towns built around a single factory became ghost towns when that factory closed. People sold their furniture on the street. Grandmothers hawked family heirlooms at open-air markets just to buy potatoes. The mafia moved in. Scams were everywhere. It was the Wild East. But here's the thing about shock therapy. It worked. Within 2 years, inflation dropped from 640% to under 40%. Within 5 years, the shelves were full, not because the government ordered it, but because for the first time in 50 years it was actually profitable to sell things. The pain was front-loaded. Balcerowitz made a bet. He bet that if you rip off the Band-Aid fast enough, the body will start healing before it bleeds out. Compare this to Ukraine. In 1990, Ukraine's GDP per capita was higher than Poland's. They were richer. They chose gradual reform. Slow and steady. Avoid the pain. Today, Poland's economy is 3 times the size of Ukraine's. Ukraine is still crawling out of the same hole Poland escaped in 5 years. The lesson is brutal. You can pay the price now or pay it forever. But shock therapy created something else. It created a generation that didn't trust the state. These were people who watched the government destroy their savings overnight, who saw their parents lose jobs that were supposed to last forever. This trauma turned into fuel. Poland became a nation of hustlers. Between 1990 and 2000, over 2 million small businesses were registered. Corner stores, repair shops, import-export operations run out of garages. Nobody was waiting for the government to save them anymore. They saved themselves. This is the foundation of the miracle. Not EU money, not foreign investment. Desperation and distrust. The Poles learned a lesson the West forgot. The state won't save you. The ledger will. Fast forward to 2008. Lehman Brothers collapses. The global financial system has a heart attack. Banks are insolvent. Governments are printing money just to keep the lights on. Greece is selling islands. Spain's unemployment hits 25%. Iceland's entire banking system implodes. Ireland nationalizes its banks and nearly goes bankrupt. The United Kingdom shrinks by 4.3%. Germany contracts by 5%. Every single country in the European Union goes into recession, except one, Poland. GDP growth in 2008, 2.8%. In 2009, when the rest of Europe is bleeding, 1.6%. Positive. They called it the Green Island. The only green on a map of red? How? How does a country that was an economic corpse 20 years ago survive the biggest financial crash since the Great Depression? Luck and paranoia. First, the paranoia. Remember the trauma of the 90s. Polish bankers remembered too. While American banks were giving out subprime mortgages like candy, Polish banks were run by people who still had nightmares about hyperinflation. The Financial Supervision Authority kept a tight leash. Leverage was low. Household debt was low. Nobody was buying houses they couldn't afford because nobody trusted debt. Polish banks were boring. In 2008, boring was a superpower. They had no exposure to toxic mortgage-backed securities. They weren't playing financial Jenga with credit default swaps. They were just banks taking deposits, making loans. Revolutionary. Second, the currency. Poland refused to join the euro. This was controversial. The European Union pressured them. Germany wanted them in, but Poland said no, and that decision saved them. When the crash hit, the zloty collapsed against the euro. It lost 30% of its value in months. If you were a Polish tourist in Paris, this was a disaster. But if you were a Polish furniture maker selling to Germany, this was a jackpot. Overnight, Polish goods became 30% cheaper than German goods. European consumers were broke. They stopped buying expensive domestic products. They started buying cheap Polish alternatives. The zloty acted like a shock absorber. Greece and Spain were trapped in the euro. They couldn't devalue. They had to cut wages and fire people. Poland just floated through the storm on a sea of cheap exports. While Germany was shrinking, Poland was selling Germany washing machines and car parts at a discount Germany couldn't resist. But there's a third factor: EU money. Between 2004, when Poland joined the EU, and 2020, Poland received a net transfer of 127 billion euros. Let that number sink in. 127 billion. That's more than the GDP of many countries. It's comparable to the Marshall Plan. This wasn't charity. This was German pragmatism. Germany knew that if Poland collapsed, millions of migrants would flood west. German companies knew that if Poland had good roads, they could build factories there and ship goods back cheaply. So the EU paid for the roads. Poland built 4,000 kilometers of highways between 2004 and 2020. Before that, driving across Poland was an extreme sport. Single-lane roads, drunk pedestrians, tractors, 10 hours to go 500 kilometers. After EU money, the same trip took 3 hours on a modern expressway. Speed is money. Poland used German euros to build infrastructure that made Polish companies more competitive against German companies. Think about the audacity. They took subsidies meant to integrate them into the European economy and used them to build an export machine that started eating German market share. But infrastructure is just steel and concrete. The real transformation was human. Poland had a secret weapon: math. During the communist era, the education system was obsessed with engineering and hard sciences. They didn't care about art history or sociology. They cared about physics and calculus. When the Iron Curtain fell, that legacy remained. Poland produces an absurd number of STEM graduates, engineers, programmers, mathematicians. These people are highly skilled, culturally aligned with Western business, and significantly cheaper than a developer in Silicon Valley or London. Western companies noticed. Google opened an office in Warsaw. J.P. Morgan Chase moved back office operations to Krakow. Samsung built an R&D hub. These weren't call centers. These were high-value engineering jobs. Poland leapfrogged the traditional development path. They didn't just make things. They started designing things. And then there's the video games. In the early 2000s, a group of guys in Warsaw who used to sell pirated CDs at a flea market decided to make a role-playing game. The company was CD Projekt Red. The game was The Witcher. Today, CD Projekt is worth billions. The Witcher 3 is considered one of the greatest games ever made. Cyberpunk 2077, despite its disastrous launch, sold millions. Why does this matter? Because it was a signal. Poland realized they could compete on creativity and technology, not just cheap labor. They built a domestic tech industry. Polish startups began raising venture capital. Warsaw became a fintech hub. They built Blik, a mobile payment system that makes Apple Pay look clunky. You can send money to anyone in Poland using just a phone. Number, instant, free, universal. They bypassed the legacy banking systems that trap the West. While Americans are still writing paper checks and Germans are obsessed with cash, Poland built a digital economy from scratch. But every boom has a shadow. Poland's miracle was built on the backs of Polish workers. According to OECD data, the average Polish worker clocks 1,800 hours a year. The average German works 1,300 hours. That's 500 extra hours. Poles work harder, longer for less pay. This isn't a miracle. It's a sweatshop in a suit. The quality of life is better than it was. But the stress is real. Burnout is common. The young generation is exhausted. They see their parents' generation that sacrificed everything. And they're asking, for what? A nicer apartment? A car? The cost of this miracle was measured in human hours, in missed childhoods, in divorces and alcoholism and suicides that don't make it into the GDP statistics. And then there's the demographic cliff. Poland is dying, literally. The fertility rate is 1.26 children per woman. You need 2.1 to keep a population stable. Poland loses the equivalent of a small city every year. The population peaked at 38 million. It's now under 37 million. By 2050, it could be under 30 million. Why? The trauma of the 90s convinced millennials that the world is unstable and expensive. So they delayed having kids. Then they left. After joining the EU, over 2 million Poles emigrated, mostly young, mostly educated. They became plumbers in London, nurses in Dublin, construction workers in Berlin. This was the brain drain. Poland was exporting its youth. The government panicked. They introduced a program called 500 plus. Now it's 800 plus. Parents get cash for every child. Did it work? No. Child poverty dropped. That's good. But the birth rate barely moved. You can't bribe people into forgetting their economic anxiety. So how do you keep the miracle running when you're out of workers? You import them. This is the irony of the century. The same conservative government that won elections shouting no migrants quietly oversaw the largest immigration wave in Polish history. First came Ukrainians, even before the 2022 war. Then workers from Belarus, India, Nepal, the Philippines. If you order food delivery in Warsaw today, the driver is probably not Polish. He's from Pakistan or Bangladesh. Poland is transforming from an ethnic state into a multi-ethnic society out of sheer economic necessity. They need hands to build buildings, to pick fruit, to deliver packages. Without immigration, the miracle stalls. But this creates tension. The older generation that survived communism and shock therapy doesn't recognize their country anymore. The signs are in foreign languages. The faces are different. The politics are splitting along this fault line. Poland A versus Poland B, the liberal cities versus the conservative countryside, the programmers versus the farmers, the future versus the past. And then the war came. February 24th, 2022. Russia invades Ukraine. Overnight, Poland becomes the front line of Europe, and they don't hesitate. They open the borders. Over 1 million Ukrainian refugees flood in. Poland absorbs them, gives them work permits, sends their kids to school. But more than that, Poland becomes the logistical hub for the entire war effort. Every bullet, every bandage, every Javelin missile that goes into Ukraine passes through Poland. The Rzeszów airport becomes the most important transport hub in the world. Polish railways are moving NATO equipment eastward 24/7. Poland is no longer the cheap factory of Europe. They're the fortress, and they're spending like it. 4% of GDP on defense, double the NATO requirement. They're buying Abrams tanks from the U.S., K-2 tanks from South Korea, F-35 fighter jets, Apache helicopters. They're panic buying a military, but they're not just buying. They signed deals to manufacture Korean tanks in Poland, transfer the technology, build a domestic defense industry. This creates jobs, high-tech manufacturing jobs. Poland is positioning itself to become a major arms exporter. And here's the geopolitical shift. For decades, Berlin and Paris were the power centers of Europe. They made the decisions. Poland was the junior partner, but not anymore. On security, everyone is looking at Warsaw. Poland has the moral high ground. They warned about Russia for years. They were called paranoid. Now they were right, and they have the military muscle to back it up. They're leveraging this, demanding more EU investment, more political weight. They're no longer the recipient of aid. They're becoming the strategic core of the continent. The center of gravity is shifting east, but this puts them in a dangerous position. They're caught between Germany, which wants cheap peace, and Ukraine, which is fighting for survival. Poland can't afford a Russian victory. If Ukraine falls, Poland is next on the menu. So they're arming themselves to the teeth. This is expensive, but it's also a bet. A bet that the future of Europe is defense, and Poland will be the one selling the guns. Every miracle faces a final test, the middle-income trap. It's easy to go from poor to middle class, copy the rich, build factories, pave roads, work cheap. But going from middle class to rich, that's boss level. It demands innovation. Poland is at that threshold. Wages have soared. A software engineer in Warsaw earns nearly as much as one in Madrid. The cheap labor edge is gone. If Poland can't move up the value chain, it risks becoming another Brazil or Turkey, countries with potential that's stalled. They must stop just assembling German cars and start building their own. Solaris exports electric buses across Europe. InPost's parcel lockers reach the UK and France. But failures exist too. The Isera National Electric Car Project stalled, showing that building a global brand is hard. Poland must prove that made in Poland means innovation, not just value. Time is running out. Demographics are declining. EU funds are slowing. Factory jobs are migrating to Romania and Bulgaria. Poland has roughly a decade to leap from imitator to innovator. Success means joining the elite. Failure means sliding back. Wealth can't be faked, it must be earned. The ledger doesn't lie, and the next 10 years will decide if Poland's miracle endures or fades. Let's talk about Poland. It's not just an economic story, it's a psychological shift. 30 years ago, Poles looked west with an inferiority complex, wanting to be German, American, Western. Today, that's gone. Young Poles know their country is safer than London, cleaner than Paris, growing faster than Berlin. Western Europe looks stagnant, living off past glory. Search safety in Poland online and you'll see it. Americans walking Warsaw at 2 a.m., shocked nobody mugs them. Crime rates are lower than the UK, France, or the US. Stability sells. That's attracting reverse migration. Poles who left for London are returning affordable housing, safe streets, growing economy. Western Europeans are coming too. IT workers, remote professionals, retirees. Cities like Gdansk offer a quality of life rivaling Western capitals. Poland became what the West once was, safe, optimistic, hungry. But a warning, success breeds complacency. Bureaucracy, corruption, and political friction are growing. The EU pressures Poland on judicial independence. Demographic and innovation challenges loom. The miracle wasn't a gift, it was 30 years of brutal decisions. Balcerowicz chose pain over decay, speed over caution. Poland stands while others stumble. The West isn't permanent, it's a mindset. The question, will Poland maintain it or repeat the West's mistakes?